are the indigenous children and youth, they have access to education. They, for example, in Taiwan, it's compulsory to go to 9 years of education. So they say the number is good, almost like 100% of children and young people, they finish 9 years of education. But what we have learned is the point. What we learned is only about a mainstream society. And as to myself, I remember the first time when I came to New York for the Permanent Forum, and someone asked me, why can you say yourself is an indigenous person? And I couldn't answer it. Because from my whole life of education, nobody had taught me how to think for myself. I just learned all this mathematics, science, all these things from the mainstream curriculum, and I learned all like the rest group of the society. But I don't really learn about my own culture, my heritage, my language, and why I'm an indigenous person, because I kind of lose this connection to my origin. So that's like, so when I was reading this report made by the EMRIP, they really think the thing we have to think, are we satisfied with that we are able to go to school? Or we have to think what we are learning at school. And Jannie just said about a culturally appropriate curriculum. That's also one of the points, because at school, of course, in the textbook, there's something about indigenous peoples, like in Taiwan, they always have pictures of indigenous peoples with their really colorful and beautiful traditional attires, and then in the description, they always say that indigenous peoples, they have talent in singing and dancing, and they have really incredible attires, all these things, and that actually creates a stereotype. When I tell people I'm indigenous, people always say, oh, then you are really good at singing. And when I'm wearing my traditional attire, they're saying, oh, you are going to perform, you're going to dance. And it's like, hey, I'm wearing it because it's my culture. And also, in the textbook, they don't tell you that every singing, every dance move means something culturally or spiritually to indigenous people. It's not just dance, it's not just singing. It's all culture and all traditionally we think of singing and dancing. And we don't learn about it at school. And a lot of indigenous children and youth, especially those in the urban, like in the cities, they don't have this access. So that's the point that as indigenous youth and also my own experience, I would like to point out. And there's some, got lost in my note. Okay, and the other point I would like to point out is that it's not only about we have the chance to go to school, or we have the chance to bilingual or bicultural curriculum that we learn both the mainstream education and also the indigenous education. It's also about, okay, maybe now we can have this kind of structure of education system, but do we really have enough teachers or qualified teachers, especially indigenous teachers, that can provide us with the knowledge? Because that's the thing, like for example, in Taiwan, the government, they have this plan for promoting indigenous language in elementary schools until high schools. But the problem we have is that we don't have enough teachers that are able to teach in indigenous language. And a lot of the indigenous people themselves, like myself, my mother's generation, we already lost the ability to really speak our language fluently. So even if we have the structure, the training and the cultivation of indigenous teachers is another point that we have to think about. And also, I think it's important to have indigenous teachers, especially in the indigenous communities, that these teachers can serve as role models for young generation. When I went back to my own community, and then like the younger generation will ask me, why do we have to study so much? Like at schools, the teachers that are indigenous, like the indigenous adults we know, they are all working at, like most of them are labor workers. Why do we have to study so much? At the end, we will still become labor workers. So that's why I was thinking, if we can have the lifelong learning for Indigenous children and youth, and also after for the grown-ups. For example, like when we are sitting here talking about all these rights, we are talking about the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, but we don't learn it at school. Or even though we learn the terms at school, what does that really mean? It's in our real life. And that's the thing we're really missing here. And also, that's why I'm trying to advocate a lot to have different types of trainings for Indigenous youth. Because if we don't learn this, what's the real meaning of all these rights? Or as Professor just said, this right-based approach. All we know is just the terms. We don't know what is it in reality. And when we are trying to advocate it, it's all vague. It's just plain languages. Sometimes we don't even really know what we are talking about. And with the mainstream society, the mainstream education system, we sometimes victimize ourselves as that all these rights are given by the government, by someone else, but then we forgot we're actually born with all these rights. It's just somehow it's not fulfilled, it's not realized. So this beyond school education and also all this kind of training to give the knowledge of beyond school or more profound, more in-depth knowledges on like international human rights system, all these things are the further points we can think about.